Hello again, Dan Alasso, Making History. It's a Sunday morning, and it's the 39th day of my retrenchment journey. I've got something that's kind of retrenchment adjacent this morning. As I was doing my chores this morning, I was listening to a podcast attached to a Substack post. It was a conversation between Caitlin Chin of something called This Does Not Compute, which deals, I think, with the disruptions created by technology, and Jason Steinhauer of the History Club. Steinhauer is the guy who wrote History Disrupted: How Social Media and the World Wide Web Have Changed the Past. I bought that book recently, a few weeks ago, but I haven't started it yet. However, based on this interview, I think it probably bears directly on my current situation, so I will probably begin reading it or listening to it. I don't remember what form I got it in immediately. The interview that I listened to was only a half hour long, which I actually found a bit refreshing. I was a bit surprised when it ended, but while I do enjoy what has come to be known as long-form podcasting, sometimes it can be a bit much. Now, I don't mind. I love listening to Lex or Joe spend 3 hours talking to somebody really interesting, like Eric Weinstein. However, I don't think that every conversation has to go on for 3 or 4 hours. I don't think that you should necessarily stretch everything out that long, especially if you run out of things to talk about. This chat was only a half hour long, but it was crisp and it had enough in it that I actually queued it up for a second listen, since I was still outside doing chores when it ended. One of the big takeaways from it, which was what convinced me to start the book immediately, was a discussion of the ways that particular social media platforms like Facebook privilege nostalgia. And the point was that this type of reverence for very personalized, even sometimes fictionalized versions of the past is just a stone's throw away from, and I think can very easily be turned into, the type of historical understanding or misunderstanding that can become the foundation of very bad social or political choices in the present. And these fuzzy, subjective perspectives on the past are really not that amenable to counter-evidence. The Lost Cause in the South, for example, or MAGA today, suggesting that there was a time when America was better and we need to get back to those values. But which values? And what do we do when we get back to those values? We need to get back there so we can do what? How was America better in the 1950s or the 1980s? For whom was it better? Were the things that were going well actually caused by the factors that we think? These were all interesting ideas that Steinhauer hinted at in the interview. He was circumspect enough not to actually say MAGA. I guess I'm not. The other fascinating element of the discussion was a speculation on what it means for people to get their history from their iPhone screens. In what ways does the medium affect the message? How should people who want to talk about the past, whether they're historians or social activists or politicians or educators, respond to this reality? Although they did talk about how refreshing it is sometimes to actually get into a real three-dimensional space like a museum, it's also worth thinking about how we meet people where they are and how we use these technologies that people are actually relying on to communicate with them, to communicate what we think is worth talking about, and try to convince them to join that conversation. Steinhauer also made some interesting points about how the present technology that we're embedded in is different from the past. Your newspaper or your book didn't spy on you, he reminds us, which is an important difference, and it's worth remembering. And when we add to this the idea that the message that the web produces for each of us can be customized, this, of course, is what enables filter bubbles. So I guess there are lots of new challenges, is the message of this interview and probably the book, that we need to better understand and address. And I think this does bear directly on my situation and my probable need to reinvent myself, and not just be a guy who stands in front of classrooms lecturing to students or leading discussions. So I'll begin reading or listening to this book or both and thinking about what it says, and I will let you know how it impacts what's going on in the next 239-ish days. But in the meantime, I hope you're having a good weekend. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you again.